I can't control it. I don't wanna feel it. Fire. Play with fire. Play with fire.
Welcome into Studio A. I'm Maria Trivelpiece alongside Kyle Youmans for a special edition of All American because, Mr. Youmans, we have a football schedule.
Yes, we do. Of course, it is still a long way until football season is officially upon us, but my goodness, it is exciting, and it's a little bit premature to start looking through the possibilities and the schedule of what it's going to turn out whenever the fall comes around, but it still just means there's a hint of football in the air, and we're getting closer and closer. We can start kind of planning travel schedules, getting out to the fall and getting out to these great schools as a part of the American Athletic Conference. Really excited to go through this, break it down, and see exactly what 2025 could hold.
Well, I don't think it's ever too early to start talking about football, and
Oh, yeah.
we have a lot of different things to break down. So to help us out, we're going to welcome in a third member of our little squad today, college football analyst Rene Ingoglia. Rene, thank you so much for joining All American yet again.
I love joining you guys, and for me, this is good. It gets the blood flowing, the juices flowing a little bit, knock the cobwebs off. And listen, I am already thinking about college football, so I love that we're going through the schedules. And listen, July will be here before we know it, media day, so it'll come quick.
I don't think you ever actually stopped talking or thinking about college football, Rene, so we're glad that you're here, especially American football. You're very dialed in.
Well, with the way the portal is too, I don't think any of us stop because you never really know what your team's going to look like when the season gets here. So, hey, the one thing for college football, it's very entertaining. It keeps us locked in all year long.
Yeah, we are certainly locked in. The portal makes things really crazy, and I think it hurts my head a little bit, even just going back, because there's some people who enter the portal and then they get out and come back to their schools, and then they're at a different place. And we're going to talk about some of those people today. Starting with, though, the American Conference schedule, there's 18 games versus ACC, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, those Power 4 schools. So some big games in the American that we're going to break down as well. Kyle, when you take a look at some of those right there, we have them listed on the screen. What stands out to you?
Well, I think the opportunity to go up against some of the best of the best, those teams that made the college football playoff a year ago. It was a 12-team college football playoff. The American wanted to get a team in there, weren't able to do so because at the end of the day, they kept beating each other at the end of the schedule and at the end of the season. But now you get a chance to kind of measure up against those teams. Boise State doesn't have Ashton Jeanty running the football like they did previously. Tennessee lost a couple of key pieces, but they're expected to be a player again in the SEC. And you've got a couple of those chances just across the way to make an impact, to make things a little bit interesting. And it's not even just those games. It's the games like UTSA traveling to take on Texas A&M. It's like Navy playing Notre Dame like they do on a yearly basis. And Navy expected to be good again this year as well. I mean, there's so many different elements to this, Rene, that at least upon initial viewing, it just shows a chance of greatness and at least a chance of showing the benchmark of what the conference shows across the board.
Yeah, you make some really
Yeah,
good
I mean,
points.
I agree with you completely, Kyle. Listen, when you get a chance to play the power programs, the P4 now, you got to show out, right? You got to show that you belong. You want to be with the big boys, you got to play with the big boys. And so if you can win some of those games, that goes a long way. But if not, be competitive. But you'd rather win them. And then you mentioned something, too. When you play the other group of 5 programs like a Boise State, I did Boise State's opener last year at Georgia Southern. They looked good. Did I think back then that they were going to make the run that they did to the college football playoff? Absolutely not. And I think that's what's exciting, too. It gives people like hope and fan bases like, hey, guys, we're in this thing. But every game counts. But especially when you play those better teams, you want to showcase yourself. So, yeah, I'm excited because there's some great opportunities for American Athletic Conference teams right from the get-go when this season kicks off.
We're going to talk about all of those teams and those opportunities that they have coming up in each of their individual schedules. So we have a lot of teams to get through. We're going to put them in alphabetical order, and both you and Kyle, Rene, are going to be able to make some good points about some of those opportunities.
We're going to try.
You're going to try, right? You're going to try your
we'll
best
try.
because the thing is kind of like what you already mentioned, is with the portal and with the uncertainties, we're not even sure what these rosters are going to look like come fall. So I think we'll start, again, UAB, first team that we're going to talk about. Let's take a look at their schedule just to start things off. Kyle, when you glance at those games right there, what stands out about this UAB team?
Well, it's the fact that they have Navy so early on in the schedule. Of course, you look at some of those early games in the calendar that do count toward conference play, and they get Navy, a team that was, again, undefeated until the latter parts of the season in 2024, and they get them right off the jump, and it's on the road. And I think UAB as a whole, a team that is trying to find their identity, is trying to find some rhythm underneath Trent Dilfer going into year number 3 as the head coach in Birmingham. They aren't going to have that ramp-up period because you have Alabama State as your opener. That's a Thursday night game, so you have kind of a mini bye going into the Saturday matchup at Navy. But then Akron is a formidable opponent in non-conference play. Oh, you go to Neyland Stadium in Tennessee in their first month of action as well. And then whenever you return home, you got a little bit of a break, right? You got a little bit no, that's not the case. You get a bye week, and then it's Army, the reigning American Conference champion. So that is a front-loaded schedule, and that's not even to mention what Memphis brings whenever they play at home against Memphis, and they bring them to Protective Stadium down in Birmingham. I mean, Rene, when you look across the board at this schedule, it's kind of a minefield for UAB, especially in the first half of the campaign.
No doubt. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn either. This is a make or break season for Trent Dilfer.
Yes.
I think everyone that pays attention to college football and UAB and the American Athletic Conference will tell you that. So, yeah, getting Navy in your second game is probably a good thing in that, Kyle, they're going to probably spend the last week, and no disrespect to Alabama State, but they're going to probably spend that last week of training camp just preparing for Navy.
Yeah.
And the fact that you get Army in week 5, that's a good thing too, because although not identical offense, it's very similar. So they're going to spend a lot of time in training camp getting ready for Navy. But, you get Akron and then Tennessee. You got to get through those first 4, 2-2 at minimum. But then you run into Army, and then it goes on, and you run into Memphis there. So, yeah, a tough start for UAB, but again, like I said, to me, a make or break season for Trent Dilfer. And I like Trent Dilfer. I think he's an outstanding coach. But it's, as I looked at all these schedules, and we're going to go through them all, I really didn't see an easy schedule in there for anybody. I was trying to kind of go through, and I know later in the show we're going to talk about who we think is maybe the toughest schedule and who has the easiest schedule. I was like, holy cow, I don't really think there's an easy schedule on here. So I'm gonna at least make one fan base mad, but whatever, it is what it is. But yeah, all these schedules are really tough, and this one's no different for UAB.
Yeah, and I think when you look across the board at this team, and you talk about Trent Dilfer and the back and forth there, Jalen Kitna back at quarterback for UAB. This is a guy that came on back half of the season, had a decent ending to what was an early part of his career. Of course, he has the pedigree. His dad playing as long as he did in the NFL, being around as a coach during his time in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and then finally finding his way to UAB. He was at Florida beforehand, before the transfer. They're building around him. You look at some of their better recruits. You've got Aaron Mattingly from the tight end position, 6'5", 200-pound, 3-star commit out of Tennessee. He's somebody he could be a safety blanket for Kitna at quarterback. Jalen Elder is a guy that I really liked out of the high school ranks as well. Kind of a smaller receiver out of Georgia, still a 3-star recruit, somebody to keep an eye on moving forward there too. So they're building around their young quarterback, which I really like. But with Trent Dilfer in a huge year, there's not a whole lot of ramp-up time, and especially with the schedule, that's going to be a tough task for UAB across the board.
And, and Trent Dilfer, he's an offensive-minded coach, right? I think where they lacked last year really was that team defense. They got to up that defense. They got to get going. But, we talked about it a little bit in the opening. The problem these coaches have, and I feel for them everywhere, is you just talked about it, Kyle. You're recruiting, you're building your team, you got some good pieces. but then you got to dodge the minefield after spring practice of the transfer portal because it opens back up. So, you lose one or two pieces after spring ball, and all of a sudden, I mean, it drives these coaches nuts, or it's gonna drive these coaches nuts. So it just makes it fascinating for one. But it's gonna be really interesting. And then, just looking at the schedule again, of course, you get UConn where you think, oh, non-conference and independent. They won 9 games last year and a bowl game. So it's like you don't even get a break there. So it's going to be an interesting year for UAB. I can't wait to kind of chronicle them and watch them through this season. It's going to be fascinating.
I know I'm certainly excited to watch the Blazers, but one team, Rene, that doesn't have to worry quite as much about the transfer portal is the Army Black Knights. So we'll take a look at their schedule right now. The defending American Conference champions, they're going to try to repeat now. They lose that quarterback in Bryson Daly, who finished sixth in the Heisman voting. They also lost Kanye Udo, the running back, to the transfer portal, which again is a little bit of an enigma in that area. But what will they have coming up, especially looking at this schedule?
Oh, man.
The thing I love about Army is, and you talked about it, Marie. Okay, yeah, they don't bring pieces in to the portal. Both academies, they can actually only lose people, so that actually hurts them. But what really helps them, which now other teams, deal with that they don't have to, is that continuity, because all their players have been there for years.
Yeah.
A lot of them prep school together. They know each other. It pays such dividends, and we see that. Army had one of, if not the best offensive line in the nation last year. That's because that's a group that needs to play together. So Army will always have that. It's plug and play. They're always going to be disciplined. And listen, I kind of missed the boat last year too. I remember in media days thinking, okay, yeah, first year in the conference. They didn't have a great year, the season before. I thought they're going to be middle of the pack, right, in the American. And what they did last year was just tremendous. And that's, Jeff Monken, great coach. And again, to me, that is just that togetherness of the academy being there and plug and play. They're not going to change. We know they're not going to change stuff up. They'll tweak some things defensively and offensively, but what they do is what they do. And, there's no surprises. And this is a schedule that I think, starting out with Tarleton State, and I love to see they get Kansas State week 2. And then how about this North Texas game week 3? I know, Kyle, you'll probably have a lot to say about this. This is a really good schedule for Army. And by good, I don't mean easy. Again, I don't think any of them have an easy schedule. But I'm going to be interesting to see how Army plays this year, coming off being the American Athletic Conference champion. It's going to be fascinating.
Now, they lose Bryson Daly, which of course is huge, and we'll have to kind of see how they fill that in. The guy who I would anticipate to take over at the quarterback spot is Dwayne Coleman. He's a senior out of Selma, Texas, which is down near San Antonio. I think there's an opportunity for him to step in, and when you look at what he's already done in the Army offense, how about this? 11 of 16 passing. What does that sound like? That sounds like Bryson Daly numbers whenever he's completing 70% of his passes right off the jump in an offense where they don't throw the ball around a ton. 1 touchdown. He had a 153 passer rating. And then he had 38 carries for about 4 yards a pop and a rushing touchdown as well. All in limited action, most of that actually coming against Air Force in that Commander-in-Chief trophy hunt across the board. I'm looking at this team as a reload team because you mentioned the offensive line up front. They've got nothing but upperclassmen up front, guys like Will Jeffcoat, who had a great year last year. They bring in guys like Brady Small at the center position, Ned Brady at left or at right tackle, who played significant snaps last year as well. I'm looking at Army as another team that can reload across the board, and they do have another front-loaded schedule. It kind of goes back to what Rene was talking about. Nobody has it easy, but when you have to go up against the offensive prowess that we know North Texas is going to bring to the table, even though they don't have Chandler Morris in the fold, we'll talk about that momentarily, but they're still going to put up offensive numbers. You have to keep pace with that. Oh, and by the way, East Carolina is the week after that. So if you don't see offense against North Texas, you're going to see offense against East Carolina. They're going to have to figure it out early. They did last year in their first year in the conference. I think they'll see a little bit more challenge, a little bit more adversity early. But I really do like Dwayne Coleman. I actually saw him play for Roosevelt High School in the Texas high school football ranks. He can sling it a little bit out of the gun option. He's got great athleticism. Don't be surprised if we're talking about Coleman as kind of that undersung hero of the offensive side for the Army Black Knights whenever it gets to the mid parts of the season.
And he's very athletic. To your point, I like. They're probably going to lose the power running from the quarterback position that Daly gave him. But Coleman, very athletic, can throw the ball like you said. So he's a great kind of insert in there. And then they'll get some fullbacks in there. They'll get some running backs going in there. And the crazy thing about Army is, again, you kind of know what they're going to do, but you can't stop. People have problems stopping them, and so. And that's you talked about the North Texas offense and the ECU offense. They want to go super fast and put up a lot of points. Their kryptonite is an Army, is a Navy that just controls the ball, first down after first down, run that clock. I mean, that is the best defense for those high-powered, high-tempoed offenses. So some really good matchups early. I'm looking forward to it.
So we talk about that Army team that you kind of know what they're going to do offensively. You might not know who's going to be filling in that quarterback spot, but I want to move to another team where there might be a few more question marks than some of the others rosters that we'll look at, and that is the Charlotte 49ers. They have a new head coach in Tim Albin. And Kyle, when you take a look at that schedule, I mean, it's kind of hard to circle which games are going to be as big for them because you don't really know what their roster is going to look like going into this 2025 season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a completely different look across the board. You talk about key players that had left, key players that are coming back, and it's just a long list one way or the other. And Charlotte was a team that we had talked about last year under Biff Poggi and what he brought to the table. You thought there was an opportunity late to build some momentum. They didn't necessarily do that. And that's why, of course, Albin is the one that comes in, and he's expected to take over and play a significant factor in the rebuilding aspect there. He was the Ohio head coach, right? 58 wins, 28 losses. They're expected to kind of go from a pro-style look in 2024 to more of a modern-day spread option sort of style in 2025. Todd Fitch, who is a known commodity at the offensive coordinator spot, spent some time with Louisiana Tech, Vanderbilt, Ohio State, was last at LSU. He's got some pedigree coming in, and you're going to get that tested early on because not only are you going to have to play a neutral site game against Appalachian State at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte to start the year. App State, always very formidable out of the South or the Sun Belt, a very consistent, very solidified team across the board. Oh, in week 2, here comes Bill Belichick, none other than the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, or one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NFL, taking over for North Carolina. This is a new coaching staff, and their first 2 go-at-its are a solidified mid-major program and one of the greatest Pro Football Hall of Fame level coaches of all time. And Rene, I'm looking at the early parts of the schedule. I don't see a break across the board for Charlotte. Welcome to the American Conference, Tim Albin.
Yeah, this fascinates me. So I got a couple things here. First, you could have had a million bingo cards, and you would have never had on there that Bill Belichick would be coaching a game against not only an American Athletic Conference team, but at their home stadium. So that's number one. So that's going to be must-see TV right there. And then talk about the juxtaposition. So Charlotte, the first, few years in the American, it's been that program that's, you talk about portal, right? 30, 40, 50 new players each year. Just, you never knew what the roster was going to have. And by the way, they had a lot of talent. I did their game at Memphis last year. They had Memphis beat. They let that game get away from them, but they had a lot of talent on that roster. Now you rebuild. But so where your juxtaposition is, you bring in Tim Albin, defensive-minded coach from Ohio. I did their game, their bowl game, Cure Bowl last year. So Tim Albin, right before he left to go to Charlotte. Ohio was the only school in the nation last year when they got to their bowl game. They hadn't lost one player in the transfer portal. So he brings something, right, that I think Charlotte desperately needs and wants, and that's that kind of cohesiveness. Like I always tell people, the portal, to navigate the portal is one thing, right? Picking up a player here and there. But it's really what it's about is roster retention, not losing your good players in the portal. That's what crushes these coaches. You get through spring football and you feel like, okay, I got some good pieces, and then you lose them in the portal. So it's all about roster retention. And Tim Albin did that at Ohio. So I think that's a fascinating hire for Charlotte. We'll see if it works out or not. But yeah, getting back to what you said, Kyle, I mean, you look at the start. I mean, the App State and UNC 1 and 2. Yeah, welcome to the American. Tough schedule right away. Then you get Monmouth, but then right into conference play, and then of course you get Army, so you got to prepare for them. ECU. So this is going to be an interesting year for Charlotte, but I do think, again, first year, Tim Albert, you will get that honeymoon year one. But I will say this, in the new era of college football, you're not getting, a lot of coaches aren't getting that second year honeymoon, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, okay, we're going to give you that 1 year grace period, but we need to see something in year two, because how many coaches do we see last year after their second year get let go? So a lot of pressure on these coaches these days, a lot more than it used to be.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And they've hit the portal pretty hard. They have 21 transfers coming in. I mean, there's guys from Georgia, Western Kentucky, Tennessee, and then they've got a trio of quarterbacks, which is probably going to be the talk of camp for Charlotte. Who is going to be the quarterback across the board? Connor Harrell comes over from North Carolina. He transfers out of Bill Belichick's program and has a chance to play against him in week 2 at home with the 49ers. Then you've got Grayson Loftus from Duke. Apparently they just want to try and grab quarterbacks from basketball schools, and that's what they were trying to do early on out of the transfer portal. And then they've got Zach Wilkie out of Southern Miss. There's only one returner at quarterback. Underclassman in Tanner Bushy is back. That's the only thing there, is where is their quarterback play going to come from? Like I said, I believe in the system that we're going to see from Todd Fitch. I believe in that spread option that we're going to see from Charlotte. It may take some time, though. It's going to take a little bit of an opportunity and a buffer period before we really do see a little bit of accepted improvement across the board from the 49ers.
And you cannot win in today's college football, or like football anywhere, unless you have a standout quarterback.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the most important position. And I hate to sound like a broken record, and this is the other fascinating thing that we'll watch. So you just mentioned 3 really quality quarterbacks, right? That are going to fight for the starting job, right? Well, these coaches, you got to kind of massage that, right? And keep them happy through spring ball and get them back to camp, because that's the one position you need to stand out, and there's only one guy that can play. So ultimately, where I think a lot of teams lose depth is if there's a really tight quarterback battle, 1 and 2, the guy that loses that battle wants to start. So then he starts looking for another home. So again, just fascinating what these coaches and these players and rosters have to go through and what they'll ultimately look like in week 1.
Well, I think just going off of that, one thing that all these coaches need to figure out is how to get players bought into what they're doing. And one coach who did a fantastic job of that when he took over the interim tag last year was Blake Harrell at East Carolina. And Kyle, you and I talked a lot about this entire season. And so when I take a look at this schedule, I'm really excited to see what Harrell can continue off of that success from last season.
Oh, I mean, the way that they ended the campaign was significant. And they have kind of a schedule that mirrors that at times. But then you've got Memphis and UTSA right there at the back half in the middle of November. I think they've got a chance to establish early 4 non-conference games to start the campaign for East Carolina. So they have kind of a natural ramp-up period into Blake Harrell's first year as a full-time head coach. And if you talk about a team that had buy-in, they had buy-in from the guys that were still there in East Carolina, but now they've had buy-in from the transfer portal. I don't know if anybody outside of maybe Memphis in the recruiting cycle has had a better portal aspect and element to their recruiting than East Carolina. I mean, they are bringing in some legitimate starting talent, and we're starting to see that. They may have a first-round pick when it's all said and done, too, in this April's upcoming NFL draft and revel from the cornerback spot. So that's going to add some element to it of, oh, I can go to East Carolina and still end up in the first round of the NFL draft, or at least in the first couple of rounds of the NFL draft. Now you've got a solidified head coach. You have a respected offensive coordinator in John David Baker going into his second year, and Josh Allridge moves up into that defensive coordinator spot. So portal, recruiting, early schedule. I think this plays in favor for East Carolina, Rene, because they've got a chance to ramp up into those tough games with Army, Tulane, Temple in the middle of that schedule, and then try and get there and be ready when conference play comes around.
I agree. The momentum that this program caught after they let Mike Houston go, there's no doubt Blake Harrell earned and won that job. I don't think anyone thought that they were going to hire Blake Harrell, and they grabbed momentum. The team rallied around him, and he forced ECU to hire him. And kudos to Blake Harrell, because he did a tremendous job. We talked about John David Baker, one of the young and up-and-coming offensive coordinators, and we talked about the speed of this offense. He's one of those guys, he wants to go quick, wants to snap the ball about every 12 seconds. And I talked about momentum, and I mean, I love this schedule in that they beat North Carolina State in their bowl game, and there was a little fisticuffs, if you will, at the end of that game, and so some bad blood. And I love it that they open up against each other. This is what college football is all about. But this is another team, ECU. Watch out for them, because again, momentum. And I've said this before publicly. It's my favorite American Athletic Conference stadium. Dowdy Fickle, and I love it. I kind of call it, to me, it's like SEC light. And I mean that in a compliment. When they're playing well and they put fans in that stadium, watch out. It's a tough place to play. And we talk about Josh Ulrich, comes from he was at Auburn. I dealt with him. He was at Liberty before that with Duke. He's a really good coach, going to be the defensive coordinator. So yeah, I think they're kind of firing on all pistons after last season.
And I've got one name to keep an eye on. Watch out. Oklahoma transfer Chiquaze Petaway, wide receiver, 6 foot, 195 pounds, just a blazing speed guy, outside guy. He could play in the slot a little bit as well. He played at Oklahoma limited time. Keep that in mind. Limited time at OU, but during his limited time, he put up 3 receptions, 79 yards in one game against Tennessee on the road against the Vols. He's got an opportunity. He was a top 10 prospect out of the state of Texas, out of high school, goes to Norman, didn't necessarily fit in there. Now he feels like John David Baker's the best guy to get the most out of him moving forward. Mike Houston can certainly do that as well. I really do like, Blake Harrell, not Mike Houston. We were just talking about Mike Houston. Blake Harrell can get the best out of him moving forward. I think Petaway is a guy to keep an eye on. He could be special in that offense for Eastern Carolina.
Now, he's the perfect type of player that can excel in that offense under John David Baker. So exciting to see. Exciting to see what he does next year, or this year, I should say.
We can't keep all the years. It's 2025, in the fall of 2025. It's also hard to keep track of all the new coaches in this conference as well. Florida Atlantic has a new coach at the helm. That is Zach Kittley. This is what their schedule looks like, Kyle. What stands out?
Well, first off, it's another welcome to the American schedule, but you get a little bit of a break in between. You get a bye week before you face not only your first conference opponent, but you go at home against Memphis to begin your campaign. So you've got that rivalry matchup, actually back-to-back rivalries. I'll classify FAMU as a rivalry there in week 2 just because of the close proximity and the Florida element to it. Then you get Florida International, that rivalry that we showed on All American last year in a non-conference sense again. Get that Power 4 wind up with Maryland on the road. I like what Zach Kittley can bring. Texas Tech offensive coordinator for the last 3 years. He had some success with guys like Taj Brooks out there at Texas Tech and Lubbock. They're going to run the football. That's part of his brand. He wants to go and run the ball a little bit more than that up-tempo look that we've gotten to know from Florida Atlantic as well. Keep in mind that they've got that Memphis game, but then some winnable matchups, at least in their mind, over the second part of the schedule. Rice, UAB, South Florida. Then I think it gets a little bit tougher down the stretch with Navy, Tulane, East Carolina there too. I like that UConn matchup as kind of that final benchmark going into a possible postseason bid if they do win the games that they feel like they can in year number 1. Like Rene talked about, that ramp-up period or that honeymoon period, I think with Zach Kittley, he's got a better setup in year 1 than a lot of these other first-year head coaches do.
Yeah, I mean, and FAU is one of those programs where, 6 new coaches this year in the American. Tom Herman, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, 2 years at FAU, and then he was out. So not much, again, no honeymoon there for him. Zach Kittley steps in there, and, and you brought up a great point, Kyle. You get these coaches that come in kind of from these spread offenses, and everyone just assumes the new fan base, they want to throw it. No, you're right. They want to run the ball first. It's all predicated on the run, and then you're going to throw off of that. So, and this is a schedule, and as I'm looking at it, and I was listening to you talk, you're right. it's kind of spread out where you could get 3 wins in a row, right? If you're playing good football, 2-3 wins in a row, and then you might run into a little stretch. Then you can maybe get 2 or 3 again. And a program like FAU, their fan base, and it's in Boca Raton, Florida. It's about 3 hours south of me in Orlando. It's a fan base that's just hungry for a bowl game, right about now. So the goal really is, do you want to, the goal is going to be win the conference championship, make the playoffs. That's how everyone's goal should be. But realistically, if you're a fan there, hey, can you get us 6 wins? Can you get some momentum? Can you get us to a bowl game? I think that a lot of these new coaches, that's kind of the goal. Let's get to that 6-win mark.
And the last bowl game for Florida Atlantic was all the way back in 2020. Like you said, it's been some time. And this is a program that, of course, when they're winning, it feels great. Everything is awesome. You're balling out in paradise. You got the beach right there, all those different elements to it. They haven't been winning recently. And
when Lane Kiffin was there, right? He got they were excited. He got them going, and it is, my daughter goes to school down there, and you're right next to the beach. It's a nice stadium. You're in South Florida. You're in fertile recruiting land. So there's really no reason for that team, that program, not to excel.
Well, one program that has been excelling and did get to a bowl game is the Memphis Tigers underneath Ryan Silverfield.
They got to a bowl game? What is it, like 11 straight years?
It was something like, yes. They have been fantastic. The big question for them, though, comes who will be their quarterback after one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play in the American Athletic Conference, Seth Hennigan, graduated.
Oh, man, that's going to be the big one, Rene. I don't know. Do you have an inside scoop? Because I don't know who's their quarterback. I don't know who would even have a chance to be. I know Brandon Lewis transferred in. I know they've got a pretty high-quality freshman in A.J. Hill that can maybe play a factor there, but Seth Hennigan leaves. They haven't had to look for a quarterback in 5 years. And then they've got to come up and make a statement early in the campaign with games against Troy. Of course, Coach Silverfield was at Troy previously and has coached there before. And then you've got Arkansas there as another opportunity down the line. I mean, where do you go at the quarterback position?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And I don't have any inside knowledge in that. That's the hard thing. Like, I did Memphis. Holy cow, I think I had Memphis like 4 times last year. So I talked to Ryan Silverfield a lot. We got pretty, close with our talking and I think I know him pretty well. And it was a luxury. It was funny. We were talking about the coach to quarterback communications. Obviously you can call the play in and talk to the quarterback. And it said, they go, it's almost a disadvantage for us because we don't need it with Seth Hennigan. He was so good. That he was a coach on the field, and it was such a luxury having 4 years of him. But now him, gone, it's like a kid having their blankie pulled away. They felt so secure. Now you don't know what's going to happen, and so it's going to be fascinating. This is a schedule though that for a team that's made a bowl game 11 straight seasons. To me, this is a very manageable schedule for them, albeit if they get quarterback play, dare I say, half as good as what they had with Seth Hennigan. They don't need someone to step in and be Seth Hennigan. They just need someone to get in there, do their best, still be good. Again, you need a good quarterback play, but that program is another one that has recruited tremendously. They have a lot of talent in there. It's one of those programs nationwide where big-time players leave other Power 4 programs, they kind of always find their way to Memphis. Is that because they have that relationship with FedEx? That probably has something to do with it. But Ryan Silverfield has it cooking there. Their facilities are phenomenal. They're redoing the Liberty Bowl. That's going to be really nice. So, and again, this is a schedule that's very manageable. But to your point, as long as they can get quarterback play.
First off, let me make a quick correction. Silverfield was at Toledo, not Troy. So I want to get that right before Memphis gets in the comment section and says, Kyle, you don't know what you're talking about, which is very true. But nonetheless, whenever I'm talking about Memphis, I meant Toledo in that regard. He's been at Memphis since 2016. He knows that program, knows how to recruit. That's why, according to 24/7 Sports right now, Memphis has the top recruiting class. I mentioned the 4-star quarterback in A.J. Hill coming out of Georgia as a high-caliber quarterback. He knows that as a freshman, there's a great spot to start. He gets the right coaching in Memphis. He gets the right opportunity to succeed. That's exactly what happened with Seth Hennigan. And now Seth Hennigan is throwing game-winning touchdown passes in big moments, not only in college, but in the Senior Bowl. He was throwing well at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis over the last couple of weeks. There's different elements here. The one question mark I have is up front for Memphis, because they've had dominant offensive line play over the last couple of years. You're replacing multiple guys up front that have had staples up front for this offensive line. Now, you do return Breland at the right guard spot. You return Chris Adams at left tackle. Other than that, it's pretty much wide open up front. They're going to have to mix and match a couple of pieces there. They lost some pieces to the transfer portal there, too. Can they continue to dominate in the trenches the way that they have previously? Because that's the difference between winning and losing in the American. Can you win up front? Memphis has the skill position to do it. Can you block for those guys is my big question.
No doubt about it, and a lot of people may not know this. Ryan Silverfield was a former offensive line coach by trade, so that's kind of his bread and butter. So in the portal, in recruiting, he knows you win game. You build teams from the inside out, and you don't win, as you said, without good interior line play. So I think he'll get a good handle on it, but we talked about it earlier. That's that group that it needs to gel. Sometimes you have really good players, and they just don't gel. And just getting back to Ryan Silverfield again, we talked about Blake Harrell, how he kind of forced ECU to hire him. He did the same thing at Memphis when Mike Norvell left. He held that ship together when Norvell left Florida State and just kept winning and kept him going. And he's still there. He's still cooking. He's a really good coach.
He certainly is a really good coach. He'll have to answer the questions about up front and also that quarterback. But, Kyle, we started a trend. And the Navy midshipmen do not have to answer the quarterback question because they have somebody named Blake Horvath who was phenomenal, especially in that big game that they played at the end of the year against another school.
Like the reigning American Conference champions?
Yeah. And he looked pretty good against them.
Run it back, run it back, run it back. It is time for Blake Horvath for Heisman talk again. And I think at least when looking at this schedule early on, they are going to have some success. I mean, remember what Navy was able to do last year early in the campaign. They had the wins to start. They started 6-0 before they faced one of the best teams in the country and ultimately a team that went all the way to the national championship game in Notre Dame, and they fell in week 9 of the season. So I expect that to happen again. I really do. I think they're better, at least built across the board. They've got guys coming back outside of Blake Horvath, like an Eli Heinrich, like an Alex Teska, who were impact players in that magical run for Navy in 2024. I don't see really a challenge here, Rene, barring something crazy, until they get to Notre Dame again down the stretch, at least compared to the roster. Now, those last 3 games are going to be tough. Maybe last 4 across the board before the Army-Navy game. I'm not even including Army-Navy in that conversation because we all know what that game means. Throw the records out whenever you get there. But I would throw North Texas in there too. North Texas, Notre Dame, South Florida, Memphis. This is a backloaded schedule. Just like Navy had a year ago, they were able to navigate it, had a phenomenal season, put up some great numbers, and then ultimately ended in that win in the bowl game over Oklahoma. I don't see why they can't expect a step forward in 2025, even off of the expectations that are already going to be sky high.
Now, I'm with you. I have them 7-0. I think North Texas is the one that starts getting serious to the end, but I think they get there undefeated. And yeah, as you said, Notre Dame, USF, we're going to talk about USF later. They kind of disappointed me. They underachieved last year. I think they were a better team. So we'll get to them later, what they're going to do, but they have the potential. Memphis, we know, and then the Army-Navy game. And we talk about Blake Horvath for a little bit. Obviously battled some injuries last year, right? That kind of derailed him a little bit, but man, what a tremendous talent. And I do think he's going to have the appropriate buzz to start this season to get him on Heisman watches if he plays the way he did. And I don't see any reason why he shouldn't at the end of the year there. And I had Navy, Oklahoma. I had that bowl game in the Armed Forces Bowl, and what a way to end the season for them. And this is a very, very nice schedule for them, the first 7 games, and then we'll see what happens. And a lot of that, and I just talked about it, is staying healthy with your team towards the end. And we get back to the Army-Navy game where they kind of just dominated Army, right?
Yeah.
I kind of felt bad for Army. You know, Army's they had a play. They were in the American Athletic Conference Championship. They beat a good Tulane team. Then you got to turn around and play Navy, and I was like, yeah, this isn't going to bode well. Navy's nice and rested, and yeah, they took advantage of that in that Army Navy game.
Yeah, they definitely looked quite dominant in that matchup against the Black Knights. And one other thing to note about that schedule for Navy is that they play Memphis on Thanksgiving. And if both of these teams are as good as we think they could be, we might not know where we're going for the American Conference Championship game, but that game might be a big determining factor. So that's one that I'm definitely circling on my calendar. Now, the next team that we're going to talk about, Rene, I don't think we should let Kyle talk about this team because he might just hijack our entire conversation. But
is it Navy again?
It's not Navy again. It's his alma mater, North Texas. So I guess we'll start with him, Rene. I hope that you get words in because we only have so many minutes. But
you gotta start with him here.
I know.
Yeah, I would go to Rene first. Let him go first.
You want Rene to go first?
Yeah, leave no crumbs.
All right,
go
Rene,
for
just
it.
take up this whole time because Kyle's just gonna yap for way too long, and I don't know if we can do that.
Here's a fascinating thing I'm going to tell you guys. I think it was, I don't have the stat right in front of me, but I have called college football games, certainly for every American Athletic Conference team, and almost every team in the nation. I think I've called over 100 teams. I have never called a North Texas game.
Oh.
So, yeah, I got to get a North Texas game this season. It's almost like it has to happen. So, you know, other than media days, I haven't had a chance to.
Rene, you're the only one. Me and Kyle have both called North Texas, so you're literally the only one here today that hasn't called a North Texas game.
I know, it's crazy. Well, and I should say, COVID season, they were on my schedule. I was getting ready to fly to do a game there, and it got canceled, like almost every other game that year. So I was supposed to do a North Texas game, just have not done one yet. But Eric Morris seems like a great coach. I've only, dealt with him at the media days, but looking forward to doing a North Texas game. And I don't know, Kyle, I kind of like this schedule. You get a couple early that I think you can win, and you kind of have to win. Lamar, Western Michigan's a good program out of the MAC, but you got to get 2-0. And then Washington State, what they're going through as a program, you think to yourself, okay, that's one we can get too. So I think if you're a North Texas fan, you're thinking to yourself, all right, we got to be 3-0 going into that Army game, and then you'll feel pretty good about yourself. And then you got some in the middle there that I think you can win. And then, of course, there's only a couple of teams that this happened to. And, of course, North Texas is one of them, where you get Army and Navy the same year. So, but a schedule that I think is manageable for them. But I'm going to be interesting to see how they go. And, of course, that high-tempo offense. But I'm going to defer to you, Kyle, because this is your bread and butter.
No, I agree with you. I think there's a connection there between Eric Morris and Washington State. That's where he was previously as the offensive coordinator, so he knows that program. Even with kind of the change and turnover that they've had to deal with out of the Pac-12 and still in the Pac-12 and kind of that whole scenario across the board, I think he's excited for that opportunity to go back and play his former organization as the head coach in Denton. But if you start 3-0 there, which hasn't necessarily been an easy thing for North Texas. Usually 4-1, 5-1 is right around their best start. Remember, they started 5-1 and then they lost 5 straight before going into the final week of the regular season, and they finally got to bowl eligibility. I think there's a little bit of anticipation from the North Texas faithful to have some success early in the campaign, but the question is, can you sustain that success? Can you win those middle games against Army, against Navy? I thought that matchup kind of midway through the bunch as well is not an easy one either. Whenever you look at UTSA and South Florida in the middle. South Alabama is going to come to Dat Hughes Stadium after you went in a boat race with them at their place last year down in Mobile, Alabama. So I think across the board, North Texas expects to have a great start to the year, but it's not necessarily about the start for them. It's how do they finish. Now, one of the biggest things, I know you haven't called a North Texas game, Rene, but what has been the biggest bugaboo for North Texas through the Eric Morris era and even going back to Seth Luttrell? Because anybody that knows and watches football can tell you they have been bad at what?
I don't. You're gonna have to tell me. I don't finishing.
Defense.
Defense.
They're not very good on the defensive side. So they go out and they get Skylar Cassidy, right? Skylar Cassidy was the defensive coordinator at Sam Houston, a team that ranked 11th in the country, 22 turnovers, which was top 20 in the FBS last year, in their first year moving from the FCS into the FBS as a part of Conference USA. So he had some success at the FBS level. They bring him over. They have a connection with him. How about this? They're going to be the North Texas Bearcats by the end of this thing because they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 transfers on the defensive side of the football alone. They have Sam Houston working their way to Texas or to North Texas, to Denton, to be a part of that program, and they wanted to get bigger. They did that. They got bigger on the defensive side of the ball. We know the scheme. We know the offensive prowess that they're going to bring. They have some fun quarterbacks out of the transfer portal that we'll have to keep an eye on. No Chandler Morris. We saw what Drew Mestamaker could do in the bowl game, which was really fun to watch. Will he possibly be the starter? Chris Jimerson out of North Crowley High School that won a state championship in DFW. He's a 3-star prospect that threw 50 touchdown passes and just 3 interceptions in his senior season at North Crowley. They've got some guys to play quarterback even without Chandler Morris. It's can they play defense? And I think, at least at the moment, if you got Skylar Cassidy in there to play that defensive coordinator role, they're off to a good start.
And almost to a man, when I talk to defensive coordinators, especially new ones that take over programs, they want to get in there and really simplify it. Yeah. Just let the players not think about it. Just go be defensive players. Go hit people. Try to just tone it down in terms of scheme-wise and just go play. A lot of times coaches think, oh, we're not playing good defense. We need to put more schemes in, and that really can be counterintuitive. So, yeah, it'll be fascinating to see. And you talk about, I had Sam Houston last year as well, and, of course, Casey Keeler. We're going to talk about him. Leaves Sam Houston, goes to Temple, and it looks like, Kyle, you just said, a lion's share of his players didn't necessarily go to Temple with him, but they went to North Texas. So, good program, Sam Houston. So those are some good gets for North Texas.
Well, Rene, like you and Kyle both said, a lot of Bearcats on that North Texas roster, and there's a lot of Owls in the American. We already talked about one group. Let's talk about another one. The Rice Owls, they also have a new head coach in Scott Abell. Kyle, what are you expecting from this schedule for the Rice Owls?
So I think Rice is a sneaky team in the American because you look at the way they return players, even with a new head coach in the fold. They didn't have to go to the transfer portal. They didn't have to do a whole lot of that. They're returning guys like Quentin Jackson at running back, who had a good ending to the year. They return almost their entire offensive line, and then they bring in a guy like Sean Sullivan to play left tackle as a guy out of the transfer portal who had some opportunity at Yale to start at left tackle as well. So I think when it comes to Rice, there's still a lot to be desired there. They didn't have the year that they wanted under Mike Bloomgren. Of course, moved on with him later in the campaign. They haven't had maybe the high school recruiting, but they haven't needed to yet because they do have guys that they're retaining and the experience returning. And Rene, you talked about it earlier, having guys that are in your program, whether you're good or bad, is going to help you out just because they know what the limitations are. They know what the process is. And I think early in the campaign, they get that same kind of first-year ramp-up that we talked about for some of those other top programs. They get Louisiana, solid program. I know you called one of their games last year as well when they took on Tulane. Then you had Houston, Prairie View A&M. I mean, all of these things across the board. Houston's a Big 12 school, but they're not necessarily unbeatable in the early parts of the season. You catch them on an off day. All of a sudden, we're talking about Rice as a team that could sneak up on the early parts of this American schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know what to think about this team. I didn't have them last year. The year before, I had them a couple times, and you talked about it. They have players. They're very athletic. Coach Abell, don't know much about him, so I'm looking forward to learning more about him and then what he's going to bring to that program. Obviously, for those that don't know, because a lot of people actually don't know, Rice is in Houston, one of the biggest cities in the country, so fertile recruiting ground there. And it's always kind of, because of where Rice is located, and it's a great academic school, it's a great institution. It's always surprised me that they haven't really taken off and been a better program. I mean, they've had flashes of it. So yeah, I'll be very interested to see how they do this season upcoming. But I like the fact that core offensive line is back. To me, it's so important, and as we talked about earlier.
Rene, earlier in the show you mentioned all of the schedules and how difficult that they were, and I think when we were picking hardest schedules versus easiest schedules, one of the hardest schedules that we could all agree on was South Florida. And when we look at this, just those first couple of games, it's a gauntlet, and that's before they even get into conference play. So when you look at the Bulls and you see this schedule, what stands out?
Well, I want to call Alex Bolish and say, like, what's your AD? Like, what's going on there? He's going to be like, this thing was set before I even got the job. And so, we talked about Boise State, right? Had them last year. And so when they were put on the schedule, everyone was like, okay, Boise State, household name. They probably weren't thinking, okay, Boise State, they went to the college football playoff. So you get that. But I love that, right? And I think the USF's going to love it. Tim Bernetti, the commissioner of the Americans, going to love it. I mean, this is a great matchup. These are these non-conference matchups that I think you love, that you're excited to get, and you get them. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? You get them at home.
Yeah.
So that's a great start. But you got Florida and Miami, so you're going to go Boise State. We just talked about them in the playoff. We're going Florida, SEC, who they really. The schedule that Florida had last year, I mean, they overachieved. They did better than people were going to think. So Florida's loaded with talent. And then we know how good Miami was. So, yeah, that is a gauntlet for your first 3 games. And that is kind of like survive mode for them in those 3. But I think they can do it. They have talent on that roster. I talked about it earlier. I think they kind of underachieved last year. They didn't play as well as they were capable of. And I think it's because the year before they kind of overachieved, and they just didn't play last year like they could have and should have. So it'll be fascinating with Coach Golish and see what they do this year. But yeah, what a gauntlet, 3 games to start. And we're gonna get to Tulane's. Tulane's rivals it as well, but yeah, these 3 are ridiculous to start off with.
It's unbelievable. And remember last year they went on the road to Tuscaloosa and played Alabama early in the campaign. They had Miami at home, and both of those games were tight at halftime. And then in the second half, it was kind of Miami and Alabama did Miami and Alabama things to kind of pull away from that point in the game. But the biggest thing for me is that they retain their quarterbacks. They retained both Bryce Archie, who was the backup who filled in for Byron Brown, who was the starter who went down with an injury early in the campaign. Both are returning as juniors. Both are guys that can have a significant impact. And I don't know if you're Alex Golish, to set a starter very early. I think Byron Brown is presumed to be the starter. You want to keep both of those guys in a competition until spring camp, until after spring camp, because like you talked to earlier, you don't want one of them to possibly go elsewhere in the portal. Speaking of the portal, they've got 2 guys that I really like out of the portal. One of them is Chaz Nimrod. That's his actual name. I'm not calling him a name. Wide receiver out of Tennessee last year. He's a 3-star recruit out of high school. Electrifying receiver on the outside, 6'3", 220 pounds. I think he's going to be a force in the American. He's kind of that true X. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on one of my NFL draft boards going into the next couple of NFL drafts. I think he has that type of talent. Didn't really get a ton of playing time at Tennessee, who had some weapons on the outside. He goes to South Florida, pairs up with one of those 2 quarterbacks, whoever ends up being the starter between Archie or Brown. And I think Nimrod's a guy who can have some success. Speaking of, we've already gotten to know Cartavius Norton, the running back who was at Charlotte. Before that, at Iowa State, ran for a ton of yards at Charlotte. Now he makes the jump, and he's with a different shade of green in the American across the conference. And now instead of being kind of a 1-2 punch in Charlotte, he's the one. He's the bell cow, and he's built for that element of the offense. 5'11", 225 pounds. He looks like a bowling ball running downhill. I like Norton, Nimrod, and then whoever plays quarterback at the South Florida, at the end of South Florida camp. I think they've got the talent to make a run in the American because of the conference schedule that they've got early doesn't rival the non-conference schedule. I think we're going to see them challenge a couple of those top teams. And then when they get into the American, they're going to say, you know what, we've been here, done that before. It's still tough competition, but we know how we can stack up against it.
No, I agree with it. And I'm glad you know where all these pieces are in portal, because I can't keep track right now. So I'm glad you're here, Kyle.
I've spent some time studying going into this one, Rene. I'm not just, this is not off the top of the head, because the portal is nuts. It is crazy across the board.
And as far as the quarterback question, 100%, no doubt, you're going to have 2 starters all spring. He will not differentiate. He's not going to have a starter and backup because it goes back to our point. You have 2, for all intents and purposes, you have 2 starting quarterbacks. Now the magic is, can you keep the one that ultimately doesn't start, right? That's the $1 million question. So yeah, getting through spring, they're both going to be starters. There's no doubt about it. And Todd Orlando, we didn't mention him, defensive coordinator, outstanding defensive coordinator. And USF's one of those programs where that's a great landing spot. And you talk about Nimrod, these big time players where it just doesn't work out at their power programs per se. USF's a great spot. You know, they're building an on-campus stadium, and it'll probably be done in a couple of years. I think another really great location there where once they start clicking on all cylinders, that's a top-notch program is USF.
Well, and the coaching job that Alex Golesh did last year, you can't take away from that. I think he did a phenomenal coaching job. And I'm going to make a call here. Chris Nimrod, right? I just said his name 10
too
minutes
many
ago.
names. There's
yeah,
too
there's
many
a lot
names.
of names
yeah,
out
a lot
there.
of names, a lot of things happening.
He's going to get drafted out of South Florida. I'll make a call right now. He's that
Clip
good
it.
Across the board.
Clip it and post it. Well, Kyle likes to make a lot of predictions. As you said, Rene and Kyle, you mentioned the way that Alex Golesh built up that program at South Florida. But how about Casey Keeler at Temple, the new head coach? I think he's going to build something special in Philadelphia, Kyle.
Yeah, there's a long way to go in Philadelphia. They've had a couple of losing seasons back and forth. They haven't had the winning ways that was left behind initially by Matt Rule before he took the jump to Baylor. They're trying to go back into that. Casey Keeler, like we talked about earlier, makes the jump from Sam Houston, where he spent over a decade winning games at the D3 level, winning games at the D1 FCS level, and then making the jump last year into Conference USA and ultimately challenging in Conference USA with the Bearcats. I like the thought process here, because if you're going to get a guy to build a program, go get somebody who's already done it and is still young enough to do it again, right? And that's exactly what Keeler does. Now, they have to do so early against some interesting competition. They go with 2 of those Power 4 matchups. They go dip into the SEC toe waters of Oklahoma early, and then they welcome in Georgia Tech as well, which will be an interesting thought process too. So those are great. But then you get right into the thick of that conference schedule very early. We'll talk about UTSA momentarily. We've already talked about Navy. I think those are going to be 2 of the players early in conference play. Those are 2 very stout programs to test your wherewithal against later, or that early in the season. You get the ramp-up period, but you're going to be beat up after Oklahoma and Georgia Tech. You get the bye week, and then you go into conference play. It's going to be an interesting start for Casey Keeler. I think he has the stuff to get it done. It's just whether or not he can get the talent level and have some luck early in the campaign.
Yeah, those last 4 games are just, they're treacherous to me.
That's
ECU, Army, Tulane, and North Texas. So let me back up. So obviously, their opening game, I never really root against teams, but that is my alma mater. Who, by the way, has a new coach and has a new conference this year. So that's going to be an interesting one for me. And so we'll see. You said something, Kyle. It's fascinating. You talked about Casey Keeler. I think you mentioned young. It's crazy. So I've known Casey Keeler for a long time. Won a national championship at the FCS level when he was at Delaware. He's 65 years old, but he looks like he's 40. Yeah. He's the best 65-year-old looking person I've ever seen in my life.
No doubt.
He's in shape.
I need a skincare routine.
Fit. He's from Philly originally. That's why I think it's a phenomenal hire. He gets to go back home. And I just think, you know, it's the right hire for Temple at the right time. They just kind of they're always looking for something. It's like every time you look at Temple, they're 3-9, 3-9, 3-9. They're perpetually 3-9, and I think he's the guy that can get them over that hump. We talked about it before with FAU. There's a lot of programs where the fan bases are like, please just get us 6 wins, get us to a bowl. And this is kind of the case there. And again, Temple's another program. When Matt Rule was there, people forget they played Notre Dame. It was the Saturday night primetime game. They were really good. So it's a program that's shown they can win. But I love Casey Keeler's hire. I think, and there's no doubt to me, this is his last hurrah. This is his job that he wants to kind of end it with. And so I think he's the right guy. So it'll be other than week 1, we'll see how they do.
Rene, you just blew my mind. I did not know he was 65.
No one does.
Yeah,
That's,
you have no idea.
I thought he was, like you said, mid-40s. He doesn't have a gray hair on his head. He's holding up a Temple jersey, and I could have told you he probably could throw the ball better than half the players that were on the roster last year. I mean, this is Casey Keeler. I don't even know. That's unbelievable. He played football at Delaware in the mid '80s or late '70s. I mean, come on now. That's.
Yeah, I'm glad I blew your mind. I knew I would.
Kudos to you. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at him saying, yeah, they got a guy in their mid-40s. He's been already there for a decade.
You should let him know that you thought he was that young. I'm sure he'd
I'll let him
greatly
know
appreciate
immediately.
it. But
Yeah.
I think that the Temple fans are going to appreciate having Casey Keeler at the helm. He's very excited to get back. He's ready to turn that program back to the strength that it had back in the Matt Rule days. But another program that finished off the season strong underneath a head coach that is still there. So. Not a new coach, Jeff Traylor and the UTSA Roadrunners. We talked a lot about them, Kyle, at the end of the season. They return Owen McCown. He played fantastic in that later part of the year as well. So looking at that schedule, again, there's no easy schedules in this American slate. Which one of these games are you circling?
Ooh, I mean, that first one I think is really intriguing. On the road against Texas A&M. A team, I mean, of course, UTSA played Texas last year on the road. Texas was just on another level. Of course, they went all the way to the Cotton Bowl and the college football playoff semifinal. I don't think A&M is to that level that what Texas was last year, but they lost a lot of talent to the NFL draft. They've lost a lot in the portal. Now they're going to recruit really well. They're in the SEC. They're going to get a ton of NIL money and collective together. They're going to be good. But I wouldn't be shocked with the roster that Jeff Traylor is putting together, with the fact that you have an NFL caliber quarterback. Yes, I've said it. Owen McCown, if he continues on his trajectory, I think will be an NFL caliber quarterback. If you've got that all working in your favor, I don't think that's a cakewalk game for Texas A&M, but they may look at it that way. And I think Jeff Traylor wants them to look at it that way. So I'll circle that one. We'll maybe circle back to it in a moment. UTSA's one of the best teams in the conference. They were expected to be that last year. They were, of course, one of the favorites in the preseason poll a year ago. They didn't live up to it. They lost the early games in conference play to East Carolina and Rice. They lost to Tulsa in just that wild comeback late in the game up in Tulsa. But then after that, they rattled off the wins against Memphis and North Texas and Temple, and they kind of ended on the right note going into the postseason. I don't see them having that slow start again. They may lose that game in a tight one to Texas A&M early. If they win it, that's great. But at the end of the day, that's not what it's about. What it's about is getting it off to the right start in conference play. And I think they've got Temple early, they've got Rice early, two teams with new head coaches, and they've got continuity to go with before they go and take on kind of the meat of their schedule, which is that North Texas, Tulane, and South Florida right at the end of October going into November. That's the meat of their schedule. I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking up at seeing this UTSA team as a 3-0, 4-0, maybe even a 5-0 team in conference play.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, actually. And if you're a UTSA fan, the one thing you got to be excited at, that you still have Jeff Traylor as a head coach, because I thought a couple of years ago for sure his name was always popping up. He was always a hot commodity. And I thought, man, he's going to be gone. And he's still there, which is really big because he's a really good coach. And I agree with you, Kyle. As I look at the schedule, and Texas A&M at Texas A&M, that's a tough one. But I have them at least 5-1, 2-0 in conference going into that October 18th game against North Texas. So if you can get to that halfway point at 5-1, 2-0 in conference, and then it gets interesting because your last 5 or 6 are pretty tough down the stretch. So, but they, to your point, they have good players. They're another really good program that fits really well into the American.
Yeah.
And I think if things go the way they can for them, at the end of the year, they're going to be vying for a championship. They're going to be right in there in the last couple of weeks, one of those teams, like they have been in the past, kind of right there.
Well, and one of the things they've always been predicated on is defense. They've had great linebacker play. They've had great secondary play. And they're going to do that again this year. They're going to rush the passer, I think, a little bit better, too. They got a guy transferring out of Baylor, edge rusher, Kean, no L there. Kean Roberts-Day. He was a 4-star recruit out of high school, went to Baylor, didn't really play a whole lot at Baylor. He was behind a couple other edge rushers that have NFL caliber talent in Waco. He could be that guy, 6'3", 275, and he's lean. Tall, long player, got some good bend to him, too. I'm excited to see what Roberts-Day can bring. And then they got a linebacker that they had transfer in from another team in Texas, another team in the Big 12, TCU. I lost my guy here. Chad Banks Jr. is his name. Another high school guy, 4-star recruit. If you get those guys to come in and play well, which Jeff Traylor has a tendency to do so, have guys ready to take an elevation to the next level or even just play well, period, across the board, I think they're going to be that team, like you said, that fits in well in the American. I think they have a chance to live up to the expectation better this year, and they're better built this year than they were at any point last year, even despite the expectation going into the year.
Yeah, the one thing that I love about Jeff Traylor is, and obviously he was a high school legend coach in Texas. He owns the San Antonio area for recruiting. And then when players transfer, and there's so many colleges, so many great colleges in Texas, they seem to go to UTSA. And, talking about that schedule, one thing we didn't mention is Texas State, they play early. I know I said 5-1. That Texas State game is going to be tough. G.J. Kinney, their head coach, former kind of protege under Jeff Traylor. So a lot going on there for UTSA in the first couple of weeks.
And remember, Texas State beat them 49-10 last year. That's not going to go this year. They're not going to remember that one.
We gave them
very
the win
highly.
because this is an American show. This isn't that other conference show.
Yeah.
I won't even say it.
Yeah, UTSA is looking for revenge, and one team that might want to seek revenge this season after losing in the American Conference Championship game is Tulane. Now, there's a lot more question marks than maybe in years past, but if we know John Summerall, I think he's going to be able to answer a lot of those questions come the fall.
Well, they've recruited really well, which is huge. They've been able to hit the transfer portal well. They've hit a high school level pretty well, which has kind of been the calling card for John Summerall, both at his time at Tulane and then even before that, before making the jump over to New Orleans. And I think we go right back to the top games and the revenge games and all that element of it. How about the fact that Darian Mensah, who transferred out of Tulane, went to Duke and gets to start the season, not start the season, but early in the season, right back at Youmans Stadium in New Orleans. If you don't think New Orleans and Tulane and the Tulane Green Wave faithful are going to be up for that game, you're wrong. They're going to be excited for that. Not to mention they've got some other Power 4 opportunities with Ole Miss and Northwestern. We were talking about the toughness of the schedule for South Florida. Tulane's got an incredibly tough schedule as well, but the good thing for them is that it's all spread out early in the season through the first couple months across the board. Then they get that break going into the Duke game, they get the break going into the East Carolina game after the Tulsa game as well. So you kind of get a first half, second half look to the schedule, and it's a completely different look across the board.
I mean, I think it's a tough schedule. Let me say this. I think John Summerall is one of the best coaches in all of college football.
Absolutely.
I've talked to him a bunch. And honestly, I think Tulane dodged a bullet that he's still there. I mean, it's good that he's there because I honestly thought he was going to be North Carolina's head coach. Of course, Bill Belichick is there. But I think that is a win of massive proportion that John Summerall is still the head coach at Tulane. They're paying him well. And he likes it there. He's got background, he's got history there. And yeah, the Mensah thing is fascinating in that if you back up to last season, Darian Mensah was nowhere even near being the starter.
Yeah.
He was the freshman kid, third, fourth string. He was running scout team, and John Summerall said, man, this kid, I came in here, took over this program. This kid just kept impressing and impressing and impressing. And he goes, I told all my assistant coaches, I'm going to start a freshman. If no one else steps up, I'm going to start a freshman. And yeah, he won the starting job, had the season that we all saw that he did. And then, of course, because of the portal, he leaves. But then, as you just said, the football gods send him to a team that plays Tulane at home this year, which is phenomenal. And I know we're going to get to it a little bit. This schedule to me is tough. You know, you look at the first four, and even South Alabama, really good team out of the Sun Belt. You know, you get Tulsa. You know, we're not sure what's going to happen there, but then you go ECU, Army, UTSA, Memphis. Those four are going to be tough. So this is a tough schedule for Tulane, but I think they got the horsepower to get through it. It's going to be fun to watch.
Okay, so let's play the game here a little bit. They've got a quad of quarterbacks here that could be the starter going into it. So Darian Mensah was the guy last year, like you said, that was off the radar, that wasn't paying attention at that point in time. You've got TJ Finley, who, by the way, is just a massive human being, 6'7", 240 pounds at quarterback. He might as well be playing tight end or left tackle. He's playing quarterback. Huge bodied guy out of Western Kentucky. He's a possibility. Then you've got Caden Simonza from Ball State is a guy that you could play around with, or Donovan O'Leary, kind of a smaller quarterback who transfers in from Illinois. Or you can go right back to the freshman. You can go to Kellen Tasby, who was there last year as well. I mean, there are 4 different guys that could possibly start. They're going to have to replace a lot of talent up front, and I think they can. They've recruited really well. Like I mentioned earlier, they're actually the second highest class right now, according to both the portal and high school, only behind Memphis in the American Conference. So if they're able to continue recruiting well, they have one of the best coaches in the country. I'm not worried about Tulane, no matter who's starting at quarterback. Plus, they've got some options to possibly do so.
Yeah, and they had a great offensive line, as you said. And they'll rebuild there because that's their bread and butter. They've always had really good offensive lines up front. They've always been able to run the football. The quarterback question, you know, TJ Finley, it's interesting. I did a Western Kentucky game last year, and he didn't play. He's been going through a lot, but you are right. He is just a huge human being. The thing I like about the quarterbacks you mentioned, they all bring something a little different to the table, right? So you can maybe use a couple of different ones if you want. But the one thing that they all know going into spring ball and camp, John Summerall is not afraid to start a freshman. He legitimately is gonna, whoever's playing the best football, he's gonna go with. He doesn't play games. He's not gonna pull punches. So it's legitimately an open job for them. So it'll be interesting to see who wins it ultimately.
All right, guys, we have one more team to talk about, the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. And when I looked at this schedule, I thought this one was pretty tricky as well because especially on the conference side, they're one of the teams that do have to play Army and Navy. They also have Oklahoma State as well. Kyle, when you're taking a look at this, ranging in difficulty, where do you put this schedule?
I think it's probably middle of the road, like you said. I think from a conference standpoint, they don't get any breaks early. That's plain and simple. The first 3 conference games are really, actually first 4, because I mean Navy sneaks in there too the first month of the season. Kind of like what I talked about earlier. You're going to catch Navy early. That's not necessarily the team you want to catch early because they have all the returners. They have Blake Horvath and company coming back. That's a tough one. Not to mention you got to play Oklahoma State the next week after that, and that's a team that was reeling a year ago in the Big 12. They're trying and desperate to work back to their prominence. Navy, Oklahoma State, Tulane, Memphis, East Carolina. I could argue that through any of the schedules we've just talked about, that is as tough of a 5-game stretch as you're going to have anywhere across the American, especially when 4 of those 5 games are within the conference brackets. So it's not an easy way for Trey Lamb to begin his tenure as the head coach with Tulsa. Now, with that being said, I think they do have a little bit of confidence because they have their quarterback back in Kirk Francis. Kirk Francis came on last year. He had some ups, he had some downs, but I think if you get him in an offseason where he's the guy, where he has an opportunity to grow into this system, to kind of buy in to what Trey Lamb is bringing, coming off of a couple of years at Gardner-Webb, a year at East Tennessee State. He's won at every level that he's been at, won a championship in the Big South, won a championship in the OVC. I think for the most part, you're looking at him and saying, okay, Coach Lamb, what do you need me to do? Because he was a former quarterback in his own right. I think now you've got Kirk Francis learning from the right guy, and that could be enough to make them at least formidable in conference play. That's just a tough way to start it off.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute blessing that they have Kirk Francis back. I agree with you. Welcome to the American Athletic Conference, Trey Lamb, because this schedule, I think you were being kind. Kyle. I think it's a little more than middle of the road because
I
you know
agree.
you get they're one of the unfortunate ones. You get Navy and Army, right? In conference. You talked about Oklahoma State already, and then holy cow, you get Tulane, you get Memphis, you get ECU, and let's just throw Oregon State. Am I looking at let's throw Oregon State in there, by the way. Welcome to the American. And I've had Tulsa the last few years a bunch, and it's one of the smallest Division I universities in the nation, but I love that stadium. I love the quaintness of it. The issue that they've had there, and this is what Trey Lamb has to do, and I've talked about this, it's roster retention, because it just seems like schools like Tulsa, when you recruit a player, you find a diamond in the rough and you get someone and he ends up being a standout performer, they seem to have been losing those players in the portal. So they got to find a way to keep their talent home. I think that's the biggest thing for Trey Lamb taking that job at Tulsa. But he's going to be indoctrinated into the American pretty quick with that schedule. So it'll be interesting to watch.
And they have some talent, I think, across the board. We talked about what they did at wide receiver. They've always been pretty good up front. Remember a couple years ago they had Tyler Smith, who ended up getting drafted by the Cowboys in the first round and is now an All-Pro and Pro Bowler with Dallas. They bring in a couple of transfers, one from Oklahoma that I really like. Ian McClure up front, I think, is somebody that you could maybe rely on to take some snaps. They got a transfer in Hunter Erb, 6'6", 330-pound offensive tackle from Texas A&M, who was a 4-star. And then I like the returner. Didn't get to see a ton of time last year, but Zion Steptoe, he's a junior. He was at Purdue initially, but transferred in before last year at wide receiver. Kind of a burner out of the slot, a wide receiver possibility that could maybe see some more snaps there too. For the most part, they have talent across the board. Kirk Francis, you got to build around him, build around your new head coach. That's a tough schedule across the board. Like you said, maybe I was being kind. I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt because I think they can, by the end of that, I think we're going to talk about them winning games late. Down the stretch in October, November, I think we're going to look at Tulsa and say, okay, here's the Tulsa team we anticipated trying to make it back to bowl eligibility. I think that's certainly possible in year number one because they do have talent. You just got to piece it all together and just maybe steal one of those games across the board. And then we're talking about something special for the Golden Hurricane again.
And you mentioned it too. Trey Lamb's a winner. He's won everywhere he's gone, and that's contagious. And sometimes when you take over a program, the kids need to learn how to win again. And I think that was kind of the case at Tulsa. It's not that long ago. Tulsa was a 10-win program. So, again, it's another program you can win there. So, I think Trey Lamb's the right hire for Tulsa, no doubt.
We covered a lot of teams today, guys. We covered a lot of games. So, to summarize everything that we just took a look at, each of us picked our top 5 games that we'll be tuning into this season. Now, we're going to watch all of them. Let me put that out there because this is the American Athletic Conference, and we love to watch American Conference football. But, Kyle, let's start with you. Your 5 games that you're double circling on the calendar.
Well, I already mentioned the Mensa game with Tulane, I think is an important one to keep an eye on. I've got that one circled September 13th. Luckily, none of mine actually line up together because I think for the most part these are interesting. I think Tulane not only hosting Duke but going on the road against Memphis late in the year. If Tulane has the success that I anticipate, John Summerall and that Green Wave team, and Memphis has the opportunity and the way that they continue to play underneath Coach Silverfield, I think that might be your decider in the regular season of who's going to go into conference championship week across the board. Now, as for some of the other ones, I mentioned that unique game early in the season where UTSA could catch Texas A&M off guard. I don't think that we're looking at that enough as a team in UTSA, or maybe we are. Maybe we're just early on in the process. I think UTSA could win the American. And if you are a team that can win the American and you dominate your recruiting cycles like we've seen Jeff Traylor do before, I think you can challenge a team like Texas A&M. That's a possibility up front. Same thing for Army at Kansas State. We're going to see exactly what Army brings to the table in the post-Bryson Daly era early and often. I'm excited for that because that's the first benchmark that Army's going to have across the board as a team following their championship year last year. What a phenomenal season it was for the Black Knights. I think we're going to see exactly what they're made of. And then just because, Rene, you mentioned it earlier, because I'm excited to see some in-state rivalry and some North Texas football, I'm going to circle the main rivals between the two, North Texas and UTSA. Yes, I said it. I think those two are going to be better than they were last year as programs, and we're going to see which one can control it in the American and really come out on top inside the Lone Star State. UTSA and North Texas. UTSA took down North Texas in a hefty way last year, kind of a burner shootout sort of game. I expect nothing less when they come to Denton this year. Should be a fun one across the board.
I'm not surprised by Kyle at all. Rene, what are your top 5 games before he gets on a North Texas tangent?
I'm done.
Again?
I already got through all my stuff.
Well, and let's preface this by saying there's so many good games, right,
Yes.
guys? And so to pick 5 was tough. And I actually sent in 6 because I said you can't have a top 5 games without Army-Navy. That kind of goes without saying. So we kind of throw that at the end because I think that's just a given, right?
Exactly.
So USF Boise State, we talked about it. I just think opening the season with this matchup, Boise State that was in the college football playoff last year. This is just a great opportunity for not only USF, but for the American Athletic Conference. So I love that matchup to get it going. ECU, North Carolina State, we talked about this. These guys, a great bowl game to end the season in the Military Bowl. There was kind of pushing, shoving, fisticuffs, towels getting grabbed, maybe a couple punches thrown to end the season. Well, they get to play to start it off. So another great matchup. And then you say, really? Charlotte's on there? Guys, Bill Belichick is coaching in this game, and it's at Charlotte. I was like, it's Bill Belichick. I have to put this game on. That's a must-watch. Bill Belichick on the sidelines in Charlotte. Tulane, Ole Miss. So it's interesting, Kyle, because I originally had Tulane Duke, right? That was the one I picked. And then I said, you know what, though? Ole Miss, SEC program. If you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, so this is the return game from 2 seasons ago when Ole Miss went to Tulane. Tulane had that game won and just let it slip away at the end. So this fascinates me, this matchup, and a chance for Tulane to kind of say, because the last couple of years, Tulane has played well against Oklahoma. They just let these games get away. They had Kansas State beat. You got to steal one of these games against the quote-unquote power programs. This is an opportunity for Tulane. And then you had this game as well, Memphis-Tulane. We know what kind of great game it was last year. It always has implications of who's going to make it to the conference championship, and I'm going to bet my bottom dollar it's going to again this year.
Well, Rene, the only thing that I'm upset about with the Charlotte, North Carolina game is that we missed the opportunity for Biff Poggi and Bill Belichick to have cut-off shirts on the sidelines.
Yeah.
We just missed it by a year, but that being said, I'll circle my calendar games here for my top 5. I have some of the similar ones. I'm putting USF at Miami just because it's that in-state rivalry. They played last year. Funny things can happen when you're playing an in-state rival, and with the South Florida team that we just talked about, maybe underperforming a little bit last year, I think they have a lot of weapons, and I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the American this upcoming season. I'm circling that one. Then nice. Tulane and Duke, we all kind of talked about it, that Mensa return to Youmans Stadium. I'm excited for that one for sure. Kind of like you said, Kyle, Memphis and Tulane, I think that could be a determining factor of who's in our American Conference Championship game. And I think just the way that game ended last year for Tulane, there's a little bit of a disappointment coming out of that. They lost their right to host, and then they went on to lose the championship game.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so I'm definitely taking a look at that one. Now, East Carolina and Memphis, I know we didn't talk too much about what this could mean, but I think with the momentum that East Carolina has coming off of last season underneath Blake Harrell, especially up against the Memphis team who has been at the top of the American the last couple of years, I just think this could be an exciting game to watch. And I think sometimes East Carolina gets lost because they haven't been in those top 3-4 teams. But, you know, we always say that Memphis is lurking. I think East Carolina might be, I guess Pirates lurk as well, right? Yeah. Pirates are lurking in the background here. And I just realized as I'm looking at my graphic right now that there are a lot of Memphis
Yeah,
games.
do you want to just circle the whole
Yeah,
Memphis
I guess
schedule?
maybe I'll just like head to Memphis and check out Ryan Silverfield's
We can move
team
the
in person.
headquarters there. We can.
Yeah,
I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they would enjoy that as much as we would. But that last game, Navy and Memphis, I already mentioned it as well. That's on Thanksgiving, and I think I cannot think of a better way to finish eating my turkey and sitting down and watching Navy and Memphis football. I think that is going to be the highlight of my entire day. Don't tell my mom's cooking that because she'll get a little bit upset.
Wow, Mom's cooking, catching strays in the middle of March.
I know. It's a little too soon for that. But that being said, we got to move things along just a little bit. We talked about the difficulty of all of these schedules. Let's talk about the hardest schedules and the easiest schedules. Again, these are operative terms because I don't think there's an easy schedule amongst any of these teams. Rene, what do you got?
Yeah, and I agree with you. Clearly, going through, I didn't think there was an easy schedule. But I picked Memphis, and only because, and it's their fault, because we mentioned it. They've been to 11 straight bowl games. So I looked at that schedule. I looked at the success the programs had, and I said, okay, this is a manageable schedule for Memphis. And I know I messed the graphic up, so I'm sorry. So let's go toughest. And it was a tie. We mentioned this when we went through it. I think Tulane and USF, to me, are both the toughest schedules. And mainly because they both have really tough non-conference schedules. And Kyle mentioned it. You know, once you get into conference play, half the battle is being healthy and ready to go.
Yeah.
These schools are playing unreal non-conference schedules to start out the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. You have to weather that. And then they both have pretty tough conference schedules to boot. So those are my toughest. And I jumped the ship a little bit and told you which one I thought was the easiest. So there you go.
Well, I'll stick with you on the toughest schedule across the board, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, Rene. I think you and I have the exact same toughest schedule. Because
we didn't talk, for the record.
No, we did not, because I think Tulane and South Florida, when you factor in the non-conference early in the campaign, the tests that they're going to go up against throughout the year, it's going to be tough for them to be healthy when it comes to the early parts of the American Conference schedule, because from that point forward, like we talked about, it doesn't get much easier, because it won't be easy across the board at all, because the American is going to be such a top to bottom close together conference, and I don't think we're going to see the same kind of separation as we've had in the past. Teams are going to beat up on each other. Who's going to be the best fit whenever you get to the early parts of their conference schedule? I think when you look at Tulane, you look at South Florida, the way that they're playing in the SEC, they're playing in the Big 12, they're playing in all these different games across the board, it's going to be tough for them to be ready whenever the conference schedule comes around. So I'm going to stick with you there and say South Florida or Tulane. Those are the two toughest by far.
I'll stick with my toughest now. I also have South Florida. Again, we didn't chat before this, so the Bulls are just getting a little bit of love from us because we do believe that they have a difficult road ahead. But I'm throwing in Tulsa into my schedule, and I know Kyle mentioned that middle of the pack, and I disagree with you a little bit, because even though their non-conference isn't as tough as maybe some of the other people that we just mentioned, they have that really difficult conference schedule. So they have to play both Army and Navy. And then Tulane, Memphis, and that East Carolina team that I just talked about right in a row. So I think that they have a gauntlet in the American playing some of the top teams, and that's why they've slipped in to my toughest along with USF.
No, I like it across the board. And I mentioned really the ACC schedule and some of those other things that I think could play a factor. I mean, we've talked about it year in and year out. Navy plays Notre Dame every year, and Notre Dame's going to be just as good next year too. So kind of an scheduled late in the year, just like they did in the past. So there's a couple of them along the way. It's just there's not any right answer. There's not a perfect answer whenever it comes to the easiest schedule. I'll start it off, since we heard from Rene about Memphis. Yeah. I'm going to stick with Memphis too there. I think Memphis. All right. And then I'm also going to throw Rice in there too. I think Rice is another school that, yes, you're going to get tested by Houston and Louisiana, but it's not the same thing as seeing Miami and Florida and some of those other schools early in the campaign. When you look at Rice, they start on the non-conference slate with home game, home game, home game. Then you start your conference slate at Charlotte, which we'll see what Charlotte ends up looking like by the time Thursday, September 18th comes around. But I still don't think it's one of those schedules that across the board is something to strike fear into the heart of the Rice Owls. And then when it comes to Memphis, you're starting with Tennessee, Chattanooga, or just Chattanooga now, as I think they're called. But then you've got at Georgia State, at Troy. Come home against Arkansas. I wouldn't be shocked if we see another Power 4 win for this Memphis Tigers team, just like they did last year against Florida State. I don't know if Arkansas is going to be a quality team out of the SEC like they had been in previous years. If they're going to take the jump that they're anticipated to jump, I think Memphis could certainly challenge them as well. Then you go at Florida Atlantic, at home against Tulsa, back on the road against UAB. The meat of that Memphis schedule isn't until October, late October. I think Memphis can end up running some table here and possibly be really good, just like you were talking about there, Rene. I think the Tigers have a chance to do something special again.
So my easiest is going to be different from both of yours, and I see your points as well. But I don't know. For me, easiest just doesn't – it's not easy, but I think it's kind of what they did to themselves, kind of to your point. And I'm going to talk about Army, and this is why. You win the American last year, and when you take a look at their non-conference schedule, all right, they have K-State, so I'll give you that one, but their other non-conference games are just not as strong as I would like them to be. And then also in the American, they obviously can't play Navy because they're saving them for the Army-Navy game, and they also don't play Memphis. And so I just think that the lack of those two teams in the conference schedule also eliminates some of the difficulty from them as well. So it's not easy. I'm just looking at what they did last year and how successful they were. And so I want to see them be more challenged because I do think they're one of the best teams in the American.
Yeah, how dare they save Navy until non-conference play
Like,
across the board? I mean, come on, what are we doing as a organization if that's the case?
I don't know. That's why they're my easiest. And again, I keep doing this because I really don't want Army fans to at me and tag me and yell at me. But that being said, we covered a lot of schedules, a lot of difficulty and easy schedules and new coaches and so much more in the American. Kyle, is there anything else that we really need to touch on before we send everyone on their merry way?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's all about excitement. I mean, I could sit here all day, and Rene, I know you're the same way. We could talk football night and day. We could make this a 14-hour show. I'm sure Zach and Chris in the back would hate every single moment of 14 hours of straight football talk. But at the same time, I still think the excitement level is real, no matter if it's new faces or returning faces. We have some of the same excitement that we have for Blake Horvath as we do for some of these guys that are coming in the transfer portal and that are making their way into the American Conference. We're just as excited to see what John Summerall and Coach Silverfield for Memphis bring to the table as returning head coaches as we are for Temple and for Florida Atlantic and some of these other schools like Tulsa that are going to bring new head coaches into the fold. So I think the overall mantra is there's a long way to go until we kick things off in the later fall months and we get things rolling, because then it's hot and heavy. It's downhill. We're getting that train rolling and we're not stopping until we crown a champion in the first week of December. But with all of that being said, between now and then, keep that excitement level, because the new faces deserve it. The returning faces deserve it. And I think we're going to get another great year of American football for it.
And that's the one thing with the portal. What it does is if you're a fan base, maybe your school was 2-10 last year, you got a bunch of new players, you're optimistic, and you really can turn it around in 1 year. So it keeps you excited, keeps you going. And, I can't wait for the season. And, man, July will be here before we know it, guys. We'll be hopefully talking in media days about this stuff.
We are counting down the days. The excitement is there for new faces, old faces, and so much more. But that's going to do it for us here today in Studio A. Maria Trivelpiece, Kyle Youmans, and Rene Ingoglia. Thank you so much for joining us on our American Conference schedule reveal. We hope that you enjoyed.